Hey, what's up, folks? Do you want to change a Sprinter engine without removing the transmission like some other Yahoo says? YouTube that does videos about Sprinters? Obviously, we got the engine out without removing the transmission. Who would have thought it was even possible? Oh, real mechanic that works on Sprinters. For the AI, we're removing an engine out of a Mercedes Sprinter 3.0 CRD diesel. And even if you're not removing an engine, I'm going to show you some serious tips and tricks about these Sprinters that you probably didn't already know, stuff I learned over the years of working on them. Amateurs, this is probably going to be a 2-day process. For a novice, about 6 hours. For experts, you're probably not even watching this video, especially watching me. 3 to 4 hours. When you find the spot of the video you're looking for, if you skip through my video, please turn the volume down, restart the video, and let it play front to back. It will kill the analytics of this video. You run through this stuff really super quick, long video. I think it's important to point out that you are going to need a change of clothes to do this job. Okay, so we're going to start by removing the 4 bolts on each side, 13 millimeters, that hold on this front bumper crossbar. I have a 4-minute video on my Sprinter playlist showing you how to remove this bumper cover. Lights in about 30 minutes. Simple. Engine job, fairly easy. This job's not that bad to do. Then we're going to remove the complete radiator fan assembly. Coolant out of it. Need something to catch possible oil leaks. The AC evacuated. It's going to seem like a daunting task. Consider it this way. How much it actually costs to do this work. Being paid to do it yourself. You're going to want to think that it's not a good idea to put these bolts back inside these holes, but it's going to make it a lot easier for reassembly if you keep these bolts anywhere you're able to put them back in once the part is removed. I highly recommend you do it. Both sides. 13 millimeter, both sides. Electrical connector, clip, T40, coolant reservoir, T30, hose off of here, reach down underneath, a rocker to remove coolant level sensor, correction, 2 13 millimeter bolts on each side. Now we want to lift up on our air filter, pull it out of the way. And this freed up, that allows us to move this back and get better access to all of our connections and fittings that we need to remove. Air filter removal, disconnect the mass airflow sensor, air temperature sensor, loosen up the screw that's holding that on there. You have the electrical component, reach up underneath it right here, push on the rocker. You should be able to slide that up or slide it down, I can't remember which, where you jump start your vehicle. Now we're going to take a pick tool and we're going to take these little clips down here that we don't unscrew because sometimes that will break the radiator and we don't need any more cost than we already have. We have to get up underneath there and pull little clips out. Once we remove the line, we can put the clips right back where they were, so it should just clip back in when you're ready to reassemble it. The clip, and I just take the pick tool and I put it at the very top of it and pull it out of there. Try not to lose these little mushroom clips. They're a pain in the butt to find. I do believe Dorman offers them. Even with the clips removed, sometimes these lines don't want to come out, so we'll wait till a little bit later till we have more room. Now we're going to loosen clamps on both of the charge tubes. Notice that I'm not taking any coolant out last, so if I have to lay underneath it, it'll get all over me. The U-style clips that hold on radiator hoses and charge tubes are supposed to be pushed down to release, but they never really work that way. We got to get our pick tool up underneath them, lift them out of the way. Most of the time you can get your pick tool up underneath the center of it, and you only have to pull it up one click. You don't have to take it off entirely, so I could show you folks. Head screwdriver, loosen up the clamps for the power steering line. If you don't have clamps on here, cut it as close to the pipe as possible. Then you can put it over the pipe for reassembly. Use a hose clamp. Once you remove those, you can remove this clamp from the radiator hose. Breaking a hose spree that won't come loose, just take a pair of pliers, put it on the inside of the hose, twist it a little bit, then you can work your way down hose, twist it as you work it off. Be careful not to cut your hose. Remove the 2 T30 screws that are holding down the latch mechanism. Don't be the next to them, be the absolute first of you. Disconnect it from behind. Taking the cable and removing it out of the holder there will allow you to slide it out. Easier to work on. Sliding this portion up and pushing this forward, and the cable from in between that clip. Air conditioning removal. Clip down here that depresses, and mine was plugged in on the bottom edge. The rocker, if you can't ever get one of these clips to come apart, try pushing it forward. As you push down on the rocker, it should clip and release. It should be able to sharply pull it backwards. Your air conditioning discharged by a professional. We're going to take the 10 millimeter nut off of here. And right below it, there's a 10 millimeter bolt. Now we can get to this one right down here. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, long pliers. Can't get this one out. cut it in the center of a straight point right here. Put a hose and hose clamps over it later. This is a transmission line. Get the lower radiator hose with the clip removed. Take a screwdriver, work it back and forth in there with your free hand. Move it backwards. We'll check, make sure you got everything disconnected. All your electrical lines, like this horn right here. C line is clipped. Now I want to keep it tilted upwards. There's still going to be stuff inside it that can come out. Not just about the legacy you live for today, it's the one you leave for tomorrow. Hopefully you're not mad at me for not showing you how to take that bumper cover off in this video, but it makes it really super long, and I needed a bumper cover off so I could move the vehicle by hooking up a tow bar to it. Made it super cheap and super easy to move. You can look in my Sprinter playlist for video showing you how to tow these things all around the country without trailer. Now this is going to allow us a lot easier movement to get to everything inside the engine. Not the worst way to do the intakes. I know there's this other Yahoo on YouTube says you can't take the turbo off without getting the engine out. He is 100%, without a doubt, a complete moron and runs a YouTube channel about sprinters. Too lazy to actually take the time to film it properly. Just look on my Sprinter playlist. I show you how to do all this stuff. I guarantee you can take the intakes and the turbo off of this engine. The engine installed, it's not that bad. Not any fun. There's a reason they charge $5 grand for it. If you want to do this stuff, you can always send it to me. Main engine wiring harness disconnection. We could spend all day long undoing these wires to this engine. Most of the time, we normally just unplug everything, but in this situation, we run the main wiring harness up here, up around the brake booster, down here. We cut all the zip ties and into the ECM, we disconnect it. The vast majority of the wires are going to stay on this engine. We're going to remove as few things as possible to make this job as simple as possible. As a special note, just in case you don't know, if you ever have a Sprinter that won't start, go up to this wiring harness right here, wiggle it as you turn it over. See if it starts up. A lot of times wires break inside here, and then there's sometimes where this wiring loom sits on a clamp, it rubs a hole in the wires. Now this is what's called a cam lock. This slides out as this comes out this direction. So as you're pulling on this and you're wiggling it, wiggle on this, and it should come out the same time as this pulls away from the ECM. Mine was being a little bit stubborn, so I flipped it up on its side and used the ECM as leverage to pull the clamp up. Now we need to disconnect the battery, and it's located underneath the floor. Just in case you don't know, now you're gonna know. Always disconnect negative first. Installation works in exactly reverse. Connect the positive first. Won't have a super huge fiery burst. So we're eating the tacos maybe. Are you eating them there barbecue buffalo fiery hot wings? I don't know. I like to add this stuff into my show. This breaks up a little bit of the monotony, yo. Say she got a little hot. Just a little hot there. That thing's supposed to look like this thing. Yeah, that's what it's supposed to be. I've got this jacked up and supporting it on a jack stand. You just can't see it. We're going to start by removing the starter bolts and all of the bell housing bolts, since we're underneath there to remove the starter bolts. They all go in from the opposite back direction. We'll get the starter out later. Proper socket for these is E14, or you could use an 11 millimeter. And since I'm down here and it's a filthy, oily, nasty ass mess, I'm gonna go ahead and remove as many bell housing bolts that I can reach. The top bolts, use a really long extension and run it out back. I just use a shallow socket to get on these two bottom ones. You're gonna have a total of 12 bolts holding the engine to the transmission. 4 long ones go in these areas right here, will hold in your starter. Long ones over here hold this plate backed by nuts. I would say if there were any bolts that were hard to get at, would be these top two. Special note, when you remove your transmission, that your guide pins remove with your engine. Drive them out from the transmission housing to put them back inside the back of the engine to guide the engine in easier during reinstallation. While we're underneath there, we need to cut the main cable ties, 3 positive cable that leads up to the alternator. Hooked along the back, main cable, alternator, need to cut the zip ties. I know it's hard to see, but you're gonna figure this out when you're doing it. Move the main line, the back of the alternator. Now moving back up to the top where we all like her to be. Now we're going to remove these 2 T27 bolts from our washer assembly to get easier access to our starter. Do that by pushing the little clip. T27 bolts. We're We're going to disconnect the rocker here and unplug the wash line here. This tube does not have to come off to remove this engine, but I'm going to take it off for a couple different reasons. One, half the bolts are missing to it and I did not take them out of there. If you do not put the bolts back in all the places where this stuff goes, especially right here, you're going to have a turbo leak, have problems. I can't believe this thing was not going in limp mode. Now, the only bolt that I needed to take out was this T15 right here, or T20. My clasp back in here because this is the only bolt of this kind on this whole motor, so do not lose this bolt. Then I can pull this whole hose out of here, even though it looks like there should have been 1, 2, 3, 4, potentially 5 bolts holding that down. You remove. This is a T47, could be used as a T45. And then remove this AC line. Now we're going to remove the 18mm line. We recommend using a line wrench. These are pretty tight. Also remove the actual steering pump as well. I do that because I'll put it up on a stand and disconnect and remove the things that are necessary for me. Later on, when I know what I got to reuse, here's the portion I kind of made a mistake on. I removed the power steering reservoir and I removed the fuel lines off the fuel rail. This was unnecessary because they unclip. Now, it looks like there was a bracket bolt up here that somebody took out a long time ago. Once again, make sure you put all these bolts back in here. These are really important, especially this type of vehicle. This is one of those instances where you forget more than most people know. I actually forgot these just unclipped and they were super easy to remove. So you just reach your hand back there, follow them down, and you're going to be able to remove them. I'll describe how to remove these here in a moment. Put this in the blind. To remove these fuel lines right here, you squeeze these two blue clips together, push them down, and they're going to come out like that, and then you just wiggle the line. They don't come all the way out, but they will come off the way off of the fuel line. Now reaching down through here, grab the starter, flip back, move what connectors are connected to it. Main starter nut is a 13mm, and I used the 6-inch extension with the 13mm wobble. Now I don't know if you're going to be able to bring your starter up here and pull off the 13mm nut and the 10mm nut right here, which will allow you to pull off the main cable, because Hacky von Hackenstein worked on this van before, and I have no idea if these are bracketed down the way that they're supposed to be. But once you pull off this nut and this nut, you'll be able to get this off, 13 and 10mm. Now we need to grab a 27mm so we can move the harmonic balancer to our torque converter bolts from underneath. Sometimes 12.27mm sockets. Need to remove the torque converter bolts. Torque converter bolts, T55 Torx bolts. I don't care what anybody else says. Tap T55 in there if you can't get it to start. You need to pay attention to these instructions, a specific way that you need to get these out, and I'm going to show you how to do that the easiest way without stripping these off down inside the hole. Remove that bung. And we're going to spin the torque converter till it exposes the bolts that we need to remove. 3 sets, ruling 6. Something I'd like to point out, I don't believe on a Sprinter van that there are any T45 bolts. I know a lot of people talk about taking the turbo bolts out, but they are for a fact T47. Strip out turbo bolts, trying to remove the turbo pedestal bolts using a T45 in a lot of instances. Now we need to remove the stabilizer link pin. And in order to do that, we're going to need an 18mm, and I'm doing it like this. I've got it through the hole here. I'm going to use my inductor to heat up the nut, as these stabilizer link pins will spin on the end, and hopefully I can keep this one from destroying it. For the years, it's not only about how to do something, but why you're doing it the way you're doing it. Situation, we're trying to save ourselves a couple dollars because nickels and dimes add up. You'll find that if you listen to any billionaires, they'll tell you it's not about the big purchases. It's about the little ones that are going to make you slowly go broke. Now, these do have a nut on here, and of course, you got to forgive me. I'm blind, and I couldn't see that up inside there. To assume that's a 17 or 18mm. I'll let you know here in a couple of moments. There was so much grease and stuff covering it. Now we should be able to just take it and knock it out of the way. At the very least, we could get to the other side nut and loosen this one up if it's necessary, but this is supposed to be like a ball and socket type thing, so it should go this way. We go to do the other side. Oh, that's nasty. Out of the way. Now that allows us to move that up and down. Okay, now undone squarely onto that bolt by taking our arm and moving it, then that allows us to put our extensions To tell you, the reason that I took that bar out of the way, I don't want to strip anything off down inside that hole. Got the first one out without removing the second one, but then it started to seem like the second one was stripping because it wasn't on the angle properly. Trust me, when that happened, turtle heads were touching cloth. Luckily, they went back home. So removing the stabilizer link pins is going to be the safest way to do this. These bolts have a really good thread locker on them. You cannot get the T55 to go in there. Give it a couple taps with the hammer on your extension. Make sure it locks in. Could not hold this with one hand to loosen them bolts. I needed to hold my backhand on here while I pulled the trigger. So make sure you're putting a lot of pressure on that because that thing's going to want to jam out. Strip these things out. Doesn't go inside this bolt very far. Did you know if you can't reach up and turn your torque converter by finger and by hand when you reassemble an engine, that your torque converter is not locked into place properly? What I always do is I look at the reference of the face of this when I go to reinstall it, and I always just give it a couple spins, make sure it didn't fall out forward. That is clicked in and the way it should look when you look at yours. It's also not a bad idea. There's a drain hole in this to take this thing out and drain it while you have it out. You need to pick up a dipstick so you can check the fluid level later on. I have a great video showing you how to do the dipstick. Make your own dipstick for this vehicle. Now we're going to prepare for the engine removal by loosening up the two 16mm bolts, one of which is on each side. There's a ground cable here. This is the main ground for your engine. These bolts screwed in there while I for jacking up the transmission and holding it into place. Now we need to support the transmission. Transmission support, piece of wood up about 1/2 inch or so I can lift the whole motor out. This allows me to not put a tremendous strain on the transmission shaft during the removal process. Now we need to prepare the exhaust for removal. There's two different methods of removing your exhaust. Cutting the exhaust is probably the easiest method because getting to the back bolts is a little bit difficult to do, and removing the pipe off of the turbo can be hard to do. I'm going to show you both methods and explain to you how they work. Your exhaust should have a flex pipe in it like this. This is an important flex pipe. Here in a moment, I'm going to show you my exhaust, which does not have the flex pipe. But because most of the exhaust after it is fairly solid, you should replace it with the flex pipe and not replace it with the straight pipe. If you do have this flex pipe right here, circumstance, you're gonna slice it right there. You need to leave about 1 inch to 2 inches on each side so we can clamp it back together later on when we go to reinstall the engine. The clamp that you're gonna use is similar to this. These are stainless steel clamps. You can get them off of Amazon or whatever, but they are even better than welding if you ask me. Not quite that cheap though. You can look down in the description below to get some of these clamps. Maybe if you've ever wondered why there's not a lot of these how-to videos that show you step-by-step large projects like this, is because people like you do not watch the video. I don't blame you. People just skip to the parts they're looking for. But I'm not a mechanical slut, more like a whore. I like to get paid for this shit. Turn the volume down, watch the video, consider subscribing, clicking the notifications, sharing the videos, giving them sweet thumbs up, because if anyone else can do it, you can do it too. Don't be the next to them, be the absolute first to you. We wouldn't mind if you considered joining. It's certainly worth the $5. Stuff takes 2 weeks to make. It just has a straight pipe, so I'm going to cut it right in the center so I can clamp it back together. Nice cut. Got plenty to affix to. Heat shield removal portion. The turbo heat shield is held on by 4 bolts. 3 up here on top that are plainly visible, then 1 right down here that you can reach your hand down and get to. If it's there and Hacky Von Hackenstein hasn't removed it and not put it back in. On later models, you will not have to cut the exhaust. You could remove the clamp right here. The issue with that is that there's other bolts that are holding on the downpipe, then a heavy clamp that runs over the top of it. And if you do it that way, more than likely you're going to end up removing these 2 bolts here, this bolt here, and then there's 2 that go up underneath the manifold cooling pipe over there that you get from underneath. Reason being is this bracket right here up from removing it. I recommend cutting it. This is the crossover EGR pipe that it installs on the back side of the turbo. If you do not install the 2 mounting bracket bolts that go inside it, it will bust within 5,000 miles of operation. It's much simpler Takes a lot less time. Fan has been worked on by Hacky von Hackenstein, and not all of the bolts are in the turbo. This is the reason that this engine actually caught on fire, was because they didn't have all the bolts in every location. None of the bolts are down on the downpipe, causing the pipe to move back and forth. It should not be that loose, allowing hot exhaust gas to go down. That's the oil that was leaking out of it, on fire, burning up the engine. Now there's a sensor exhaust components that needs to be removed. I'm gonna leave it plugged in till I get ready to hoist the engine out of here. Okay, so I ended up undoing this line here. We've got a vacuum line here hooked up back there. We need to remove 2 bolts that are holding down the dipstick tube. We do not need to remove the dipstick tube itself. In my situation, it had 2 bolts holding it on. One right here, and then one over here, and they were easy to get out. One more line to go, it seems. There's a heater core cooling tube. Engine hoisting locations. Engine has 2 connecting locations, one right here, one back here. There's supposed to be one over there, but looks like Hacky von Hackenstein struck again and didn't put it back in there the last time they were doing something that they didn't know what the hell they were doing. And here we go. I did forget a few things though. My motor mounts were stuck, so I'd have to take a pry bar and pop it up underneath there as I had pressure on it. I needed to do that on both sides so it would break free out of that motor mount. Mine won't come out. I left one of the bolts sticking through the back over here, so don't do that. Now I remembered why I couldn't get that out of there, because that line was in the way and it was blocking it from going backwards. Just took a pry bar, moved it out of the way. First, when the only thing that's hanging me up, one sticky motor mount, starts raining like cats and dogs. Just my life. Okay, so we've got to disconnect wire right here, which leads down to a sensor down there, to the exhaust. If you're removing exhaust the way that I do it, we should be able to pull the engine back and disconnect the rest of the electrical cables that we have still connected. So our exhaust is now contacting our dipstick tube, raise it up over that. As we do that, I'm going to start raising up over the tube. Be able to come down here and unplug these electrical connectors right here, including undoing our 13mm nut that's holding on our battery cable. Double check yourself. It's always wise to do so. Out, and there you go. Oh, dude, look at that. That is freaking awesome. Okay, so here's the reason this thing caught on fire. I'm assuming it could also be leaking fuel, but I'm pretty sure it was just leaking oil. Them not putting the bolts inside the turbo ignited the oil that was dripping down the back of the engine, melting everything down inside there. Not the best scenario here. Yeah, look at that. They didn't even put the bolts in tight there. These guys were horrible worked on this. If you've got a question about this procedure, you can look me up on Clay's AC and Auto Repair on Facebook Messenger. I answer them for absolutely free. I don't care about your baby mama drama. I just try to help you with your whip. Remember, no matter what it is in life that you think you can or cannot do, if anyone else can do it, you can do it too. Don't be the next to them, be the absolute first to you. Consider subscribing, clicking the notifications, sharing my videos, and giving me them sweet thumbs up. And if this video was helpful, that join button. Send us a couple bucks. We'll take it. Don't have any money. Why, we're working on sprinters, making YouTube videos for you folks. God bless, folks. Have the absolute best of days.